This, there we go, recording started. Yes, thank you everybody for joining us today. This is our latest edition of the University of Michigan Press Author Live Talks. It's actually our last one of this summer of author talks. So ending on a high note with A.D. Carson, the author, creator of I Used to Love to Dream, which is well, you'll hear a lot more about it, but the first academically published rap album. And he will be in conversation with Griffith Rollefson, who is a forthcoming author with the University of Michigan Press of the book Critical Access, which you're going to hear more about later. Moving on. So just to start, we're going to go over a couple of the Zoom features for today for those on Zoom. So everybody's muted and you don't have video going, but you are able to interact with us in the chat, which we encourage you to use with any issues that you may have, or we're going to have some reflection questions that we invite you to respond in the chat about. And also for any questions that you want asked of AD or Griff during the presentation, you can submit it through the Q&A icon. Sean, if you could go through the slides as we go through. Yep. So yep, any technical issues, feel free to chat. If you click through the next couple of slides too, I'll show you what those icons are. Who you address your chat to. And then for your questions, you can choose to ask anonymously. If you choose to do so, we won't judge or care either way, but it's up to you. And then so moving past Q&A, as I mentioned, this is part of our University of Michigan Press Author Live Talk series. We've been running these Thursdays since June. This gives you a chance as the audience to hear directly from our authors and interact with them. It also really highlights the capabilities of our ebook collection, since we actually have made all of the books covered in our Author Live Talk series available for free to read online through August 31st. And actually in the case of AD's book or work, it's actually open access, so it will always be free, but for all of our other books. And like I mentioned, we really encourage you to participate in today's talk through polling, responding to polls, chatting with us, asking questions, and a recording will be sent out after the talk today. And so that leads us to, first, we just kind of want to hear who's in our audience today. It helps us just understand what particular things you guys might be interested in and kind of shapes our talk. Seeing pretty split at the top between professor, instructor, and publisher. Professors are winning out though. Got a couple librarians, interested readers, other researcher. Professor, instructor is taking the lead over publisher. So that's cool. I'm gonna go ahead. We have a couple more responses rolling in. There we go. Yep, so largely fellow faculty members here, and pretty good range of folks. So thank you, everyone. A little bit about the University of Michigan Press. So we've been around, we're actually celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. We publish about 100 books each year. We have really strong list in political science, performing arts, classics, just really a range of things. We also have special divisions for English language teaching titles, and also a trade list for kind of the Michigan area, Great Lakes. We also do a lot in digital scholarship, including we're heavy proponents of open access and enabling digital works. And you'll kind of hear more about that through our mentions of Fulcrum today. Moving on, I think I have one more introduction. So as I mentioned before, all of the books in our live talk series that we've been running for the summer are available free to read through our Fulcrum ebook collection through the end of the summer. Fulcrum is a great platform that allows us to really bring our authors' works online in a very native digital reading way. You can listen to media right inside the books, have a whole bunch of other cool features that you'll see in kind of the images in the upcoming slides while AD and Griff have their discussion. And you can also read and download all of our open access titles from there, and any interested libraries can access and subscribe to our ebook collection through Lyrasis. With all that being said, I'm happy to pass off to AD and Griff and hear more about this awesome work. Thank you so much, AD and Griff, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Teresa. So let me do a quick introduction and some of the overview of what we're up to. Everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Yep. All right. So I'm Griff Rollefson. I'm a professor of music at University of College Cork in Ireland. And I'm a quick thank you to Sarah Cohen and Lauren Kajikawa. They brought me on to do the interview here and chat with AD. I'm absolutely honored to do it. And but the connection is that I've got a book coming out called Critical Access, Watch the Throne and the New Gilded Age, trying to decide between Watch the Throne and the New Gilded Age or the Last Gilded Age. But hopefully last Gilded Age, right? But that's coming out next spring. And just looking through AD's work, we've got a lot of things in common, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in the last weeks, we've been met a couple times to talk about some of these things. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of his thinking on I Used to Love to Dream, the mixtape essay itself, his broader work, and sort of the context of where this work comes from, how it's an intervention in some of the most important issues facing us right now, as we're in the midst of this, the Democratic Convention right now, and election season, and a summer that, you know, we all hope will go down in history as the one that changed things. And we'll talk about that later, but let me first introduce our featured guest here, AD. AD Carson, AKA AD the Great, is assistant professor of hip hop and the Global South at the University of Virginia's wonderfully progressive Department of Music, my favorite Department of Music, secretly. He's a performance artist. Sorry. I've got everything on my phone here and have just goofed up here. He's a performance artist, an educator from Decatur, Illinois. We'll talk about that. He received his PhD in rhetorics, communication, and information design at Clemson University, doing work that focuses on race, literature, history, and rhetorical performances. A 2016 recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Excellence in Service at Clemson, Carson worked with students, staff, faculty, and community members to raise awareness of historic entrenched racism at the university through his See the Stripes campaign, which takes its name from his 2014 poem. And just as a heads up, if anybody still hasn't heard about the university's Studying Slavery program, that's connected to all of the Rhodes Must Fall campaigns and all those things. We're trying to get those things going in Cork here as well. Of course, it's not just the US that's part of these colonial histories. It's Ireland has a particularly interesting and complicated one, but do be in touch with that, another University of Virginia initiative. You might best know AD's work from all the global press that really blew up surrounding his dissertation, Owning My Masters, The Rhetorics of Rhymes and Revolutions, a digital archive that features a 34-track rap album and that was recognized by the Graduate Student Government as the 2017 Outstanding Dissertation. Professor Carson is an award-winning artist with essays, music, and poetry published in The Guardian, the Journal for Cultural and Religious Theory, and elsewhere. His essay, Chamalkio from Chicago, Flashing Lights and the Great Kanye and West Egg, appears in The Cultural Impact of Kanye West, another connection between our work here. And Oedipus, Not So Complex, a blueprint blueprint for literary education is in Jay-Z Essays on Hip Hop's Philosopher King. Another, again, connection. Amazing work. Carson has also written a novel, Cold, which hybridizes poetry, rap lyrics, and prose, and The City, Unpoems, Thoughts, Rhymes, and Miscellany, a collection of poems, short stories, and essays. You can follow AD on Twitter and Instagram at AD the Great. So welcome, and sorry for the embarrassing long introduction. Today we're going to talk about his new mixtape essay, I Used to Love to Dream. I just about said I used to love her. Maybe we can talk about that later. I Used to Love to Dream, which is the first hip hop album published by University Press. And we'll talk about that and a number of other issues over the next 30 to 40 minutes before we turn the floor over to you, the audience. In fact, feel free to write questions in the chat, and we'll try to incorporate those as we go as well, just depending on how things develop. As I mentioned, we've got a bunch of things in common in terms of hip hop studies, in terms of Jay-Z and Kanye, but also in terms of where we're from. I was born in San Francisco. We were just talking about our caps, but raised in Milwaukee. And so I know Decatur not well, but I know I've been through it many times. And I really want to talk more about the sort of, this is an album that's about Decatur, about being from this place. But I thought maybe, and I want to talk about that, how sort of localism and local knowledge is sort of one of the hallmarks of hip hop knowledge.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that we talked about, and the first thing that hit my ear, is it sounded like Decatur.
Yeah.
And I wondered, AD, as a first way, sort of entry point into the album, could you tell us a little bit about the sound? Is this an Illinois sound? Is this a Chicago sound? Is it a Midwest sound?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, oh yeah, and thanks to everybody who's, worked really hard to make this happen. And thank you, Griff, for being willing to be in this conversation with me. Teresa and Sean, and everybody at University of Michigan Press. When I decided that I was going to write this, well, I'll say that I have some collaborators that I've worked with for a really long time. And so you'll hear, I guess the only other rapping voice on the album is Truth. And he's an artist that I met. He's from Chicago, and we met, a while back and have collaborated consistently since. And so I think that if you listen to his music, he would say that his is Chicago music, like hands down. He's not even aspiring to do something. He's not aspiring to do something other than make music that sounds like home. And I think that we have that in common, though Decatur is not Chicago. Sonically, there are some things that will always resonate. Coming out here to Virginia, one of the first questions that I ask is, well, what does Charlottesville sound like? Because, I'm going to live here and I need to know, well, yeah, what does it sound like? What is this region claiming, and what is it produced? What is it producing? And specifically working with Vintage, who's another of the collaborators on the album, it resonated. Like what he was doing sounded so much like home to me. And so this thing that I was doing in Charlottesville, if I was going to try to finding someone to work with in Charlottesville who makes music that reminds me of home was just a really, I'll say I felt really fortunate for that. But it was also just kind of luck to say, because Vintage does a lot of different stuff, but you can hear the obvious gospel influence. You can hear, the low warble, and then on some of the tracks, even a growl that's underneath what's going on. And then obviously for some of the tracks you hear the samples and the way that they're manipulated or the way that they're chopped up. And I think that this was kind of what reminded me, or what made me believe that I had the album and what the album was going to be about whenever I was putting the songs together. Because I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to write this project about home. the music that I was writing led me to what the album was going to be about.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you weren't saying, you know, I need these influences on the beats. I need this thing. I need chipmunk soul. I need gospel.
Yeah. No. I was depressed, and I was like wanting to go home. I wanted to feel home, and I kept like writing to home, kept writing about home, and kept writing about how I feel about missing those things. And I didn't realize that until some certain moment before we, you know, me and my, you know, my colleagues and some students were about to go out to this project, or go out to South Africa to work on this project, a community archiving project that was going on in Makanda, where, well, you know, Rhodes is, and yeah, and I'm like, oh, I've got this other thing. So being that far away from all of the homes made me feel that even more precisely. And then when I'm listening to the songs, then I'm like, oh yeah, this, when people ask me where home is, that's a complicated question, because I live in Charlottesville, I'm from Decatur, but if you ask me where's home, like, I'll tell you where my house is. And if you ask me where my folks are from, then I'll tell you where, you know, where my people are. But if you ask me what is home, then that's going to be a really difficult question. And it's difficult for all those reasons, because just, you know, a few years ago, or just a couple years ago, when people asked that, my house, you know, like the place I live was in Clemson. And, you know, it's a weird thing to say that Clemson, South Carolina is home for someone like me.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. After moving around a lot myself and not sure knowing exactly how to say that, do I give you the short answer or the long answer?
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I wonder. I mean, one of the main things that I love about the album, though, is that it is deeply anchored in place. And I wanted to ask you if we can sort of think of hip hop. You know, one of my main ways of thinking about hip hop is that it's a way to find the universal in the granular details of the particular. So like, I always say, well, actually it's big in Ireland. I think I first heard it here. Dig where you stand. If you dig deep enough, you'll find the universe. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how hip hop in this album about home, about Decatur in particular, is there something of that idea? What does this creative journey lead you to, and how does hip hop facilitate that location of place?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, there was, so, I mean, I guess like when you come to a place like Charlottesville, or, I mean, you know, Decatur also there's a, you know, a small university there. And it's where I finished my undergraduate studies, and then, you know, in Clemson, it's a college town, and you start thinking about the ways that you might involve yourself in the community where you live. And I think that then you're constantly reminded that this energy that you're giving to this place where you live, but not where you're from, could be energy that you dedicate to the place where you're from. And, you know, you also think of the ways that the people you love might benefit from your energy more directly if you're doing it there rather than here. And I mean, I think that, you know, if you can kind of scale out from that and then think about describing that place where you're from, in a lot of ways, perhaps then you're also describing the place where you're at. And that was what I found, because I can't speak with much authority about what it's like growing up in Charlottesville or growing up in the shadow of the University of Virginia. But I can certainly speak to what it's like growing up in Decatur in the shadow of Millikan University. And I can certainly, you know, speak about what my brothers and I, you know, like what my mother and my pops and my grandparents went through. And when I'm talking about those folks in that community, in the ways that I understand it, then I think that that's much easier to communicate what other families might be dealing with in the places where they are. Whereas if I was here and then I say, well, I'm sure that you all did this, or I'm sure that these things happened, well, there are going to be people who are automatically resistant to that. And I understand it, because if somebody came to my hometown talking about their hometown or talking about how they understand my hometown, then I'm probably going to be less inclined to really, to respond to that. I mean, again, I try to listen with empathy, and I try to like lead with generosity at this point, but I wasn't always that way. You know, I wasn't always aiming for that. And so, you know, people would tell me, you know, back home when I was living at home, here's what you should do, or here's what, you know, whatever. And then I'm like, yeah, you're not even from here. Mm-hmm. And so then it creates this, this conflict, because now where I can't talk about what living in Decatur is like right now, because I don't live there right now. I can talk about living in Charlottesville right now because I live here right now. I can talk about growing up in Decatur because I grew up there, or growing up in the many places, you know, in between, you know, when we did do all the moving we did. And so it's this balance that I'm trying to find. And I believe that this sort of particular and general thing that we do when we're making music in these specific places is a way to try to, is to try to like work that nuance, or, you know, rely sometimes on the ambiguity. You know, when you hear a sound that reminds you of home, but is produced, you know, in another place, then there's a connection there already. And so if I'm talking about Decatur over a beat that's made in Charlottesville, perhaps I can kind of bridge that in a way that, you know, writing an essay about it, or, you know, like speaking out, you know, in a different way might not be able, like, you know, the contours, like I might not be able to get into the contours with anything but this sound.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just the slippages of sometimes hearing something, even just reading something versus hearing somebody talk about something, something about the slippages and the ambiguities of, yep. You can find yourself, maybe you can't find yourself on the written page, but if you hear somebody, for instance, speaking with passion about their local experience, you can hear yourself in that. There's space, there's room for you in that.
Yeah, and I think that also sometimes, you know, just like the ways that people deliver, you know, the ways that a sentence is delivered. I know we talked about this, you know, where, you know, like on one of the songs I say, I was gifted as a child, granny listened and said it. You know, like this idea of like being able to introduce my grandma, like to be able to introduce her, not just like what she said or the way that she made sense of the world, but also literally the way that she said certain things. And I mean, you know, I don't know that there's like a worldwide granny language, but I do know that my grandma is not getting cited that much in academic spaces. And I think she has a lot that we could, you know, that we could learn from in these circumstances. You know, she brings a lot into these conversations. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want to leave that somewhere where somebody's like, well, this is not how we write in academic spaces, or this is not, yeah, you know, definitely hashtag cite more grandmas.
Cite more grandmas. All right, so let's listen. I was thinking about that ambiguity. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at. It ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. And that sort of performative part. Let's get some sound in our ears.
Sure.
And then maybe we can talk a little about afterwards.
Okay.
Sean, you've got to unmute yourself, I think, so that we can hear the audio playing on the screen.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning too.
In the meantime, I don't know, Griff and Edie, if you were seeing in the chat.
Time never makes it easier, leave it and let it go. But it's there when I close my eyes even more than it was before, so I lie. I be awake almost nights, work in the mornings, rehearsing purpose, converted to verses, merciless warnings, it hurts. And I feel I'm torn even worse when it's in a song, and the difference between the then and the now is it feels so wrong that I'm here. Yet here I am, narrator, illustrator, pro and antagonist. You'll see a difference later if you wait to hear me out. If the mantras get the paper and your dogs be playing fetch, the catch is called endless behavior. The paradox is apparent. I be wondering the meaning, meeting me through metaphor. I be humble when I see him, mumbling my grief, staring at my my feet like I be nervous. Most evenings, I be staring at a beat and seeing murder. I was gifted as a child. Granny listened and said it. Told me to never bury my talents, give it and spread it. Learn from her Bible lessons much more than I give them credit. So really, my synesthesia is more like a synesthetic. I be knowing I be on some shit I shouldn't, Lord forgive me. But if I could change a thing, I probably wouldn't. I be putting on the mask, still never smile for cameras. Try to keep the hunger of an amateur. Ampersand, ample ammunition, handle business, thinking little. Laugh out and strategize, and look out for watching eyes. Occupy the lane I'm in, and know that even if I signal, it'll only change what I see in the rear view. Where I'm at, I don't be knowing the difference between my foes and my friends. I don't pretend, and I'm cool with not fitting in. A little more than 10 years of sobriety. Plus, I try to be healthier. Might as well be aware how they coincide if it's better. I be engaging with people, anxious, abstaining, and then some days I really hate I chose therapy over Jameson. The polar opposite of myself. Feel like I'm barely him. But he ain't died, and I ain't bury him. The thing they call success is real elusive. Used to boast about exclusive shit. Truthfully, I wasn't used to shit. Still ain't, and still can't decide if I be bragging cause I'm proud or ashamed. Alcohol would chase it out when it came, but now my frame of reference checking what's a lesson worth the stress, or if what I used to call hate was just depression with inflections. I externalize, accepted, and projected on competitors, and actually, I ain't too sure I'm better cause,
That was a nice mix there, Sean.
So, yeah, you should have stood up.
Yeah.
All right, so, you mentioned that this album came out of another place, not just out of Decatur, but out of depression.
Yeah.
Do you want to? I wanted to ask a little bit more about the setting of the sort of the university and those knowledge structures. But I think before we even get into that, is there anything about? My wife and I have talked about this a lot in terms of being creative artists, and it's maybe it's a love letter to Decatur, but it comes out of a place of having to had gone through something. Is there anything about what would you say to young artists, for example, who think they need to go through something in order to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this before, there's a lot of shit that that I'm not going to trade pain for like the products of it, that's not the thing that I'm asking for. If I could have better days where I wake up and feel good and, go and do shit or do nothing, I want that. I don't want to feel like I don't want to get out of bed, or, I don't want to be around, I don't want to be here, or I need to, I either need to do something to numb myself, or I already feel numb and I can't feel anything. I understand why people say that, because, writing your way through it, you have there's this ability to reflect on it. And, this is also, it's strange, because when I wrote the album, I'm like, this is terrible that I feel this way with all of these things that I told myself I would have loved to have had to be experiencing. And then I thought, well, because in my mind, I got the little progress narrative, yeah, it's going to get better. And then, well, this pandemic hit, and now I'm looking back on the time where I wrote the album, those were the days.
Those are the good old days, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, it's kind of messed up. I mean, I'm laughing about it now, but it's not, it's not funny. It's been a tough 8 months or so, just dealing, or 6 months, dealing with everything that's happened since the album was ready, and going out there. And then the album itself as an event, it pales in importance to the kinds of things that are going on now, even if the contents do speak very particularly to a lot of the things that are happening. It's just really, it's tough to be we need music for this. I mean, because of course I believe that we do, but it's just, it's really difficult to be in that space saying that this might be a way that we think about this, or this might be a way that we move through it, because, you know, like you want to provide something else, you know, like when folks back home, you know, are passing away, or, you know, like there's difficulty at the crib, like you want to be able to like get in a car or hop on a plane and go there, like to actually be specifically like to be right there. I want to hug my brothers, you know, and my sisters and my mom. And that's, you know, so that's, you know, it's strange what I thought the album was going to do and what it was going to mean and what it actually, you know, like is doing and what it means right now. But also, you know, like I'll say that this idea that your music alone or writing your music alone is going to be therapy, that didn't work for me. You know what I mean? Like I went and, you know, because I had the, you know, like the resources available to be able to talk to somebody about what was going on. And this person, you know, like my therapist is like, well, you know, have you thought about writing about it? And I'm like, I got a whole catalog of albums and all kinds of shit, you know, like you can, you know, like I'm definitely writing about this stuff, but I also need some other strategies, because like, it's what I do when I'm happy. It's what I do when I'm sad. It's what I do when I'm lonely. It's what I do when I'm anxious. And so like, I mean, you know, like it's cool to have like, you know, like a vice grip or something like that, you know, but like I need some other tools.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you, so this is, Lauren just asked a question about the performance of writing. And actually I want to get to that on the backside of this next question, which is just following up on that. I've got this, and I've got a PhD student, we talked about this before, starting this fall, who's an MC, great MC. And we've talked about the possibility of sort of performative PhDs and practice-based research, arts practice-based research. It's a really necessary sort of thing that you're sort of at the forefront of. But with regards to that sort of like, we can be performative writers, and I try to do that, you try to do that. But how do we get our universities, how does this young woman, Ophelia, who's starting soon, how would you advise somebody like that to make their work visible to the university sort of power structures, knowledge structures? I know that's a canned question for you from our conversation before, but I think it's an important one in terms of if you've opened the door, or maybe, you know, if you've pushed the door farther open for this kind of work, what's the next step, or like do you have any advice on making performative work legible to the university sort of knowledge structures?
Yeah, I think part of it is maybe trying to, you know, if you have access to people and resources, or, you know, like sometimes getting on the sites of places that are publishing things that are groundbreaking, and then looking out for, I mean, you know, people who are willing to take the challenge of performing or of publishing challenging work. So it's like asking questions, you know, being able to, you know, like to have a conversation with folks like Sarah at University of Michigan Press, and asking, what does this look like? What does submitting something to you all look like? And, you know, beforehand, I think the way that I would answer this question would be like, yeah, well, all of my advice is going to be bad advice. So, you know, make sure to take this with a grain of salt, because if people are telling you that you've got to publish this way in these places, then they're expecting those kinds of things. They're expecting you to produce those kinds of things. So you can't take your mind off the fact that those are the currency. But if things are changing, then, you know, it's really important to get in contact with the people who are going to advocate for that change, who have institutional, you know, like leverage or power to be able to take what you have to, or through a process like I used to love to dream went through, you know, like for the peer review, and then your, you know, like these committees who are evaluating whatever it is that you bring to the table have the ability to say, this fits both that, you know, like this thing that we need and this thing that you do, as opposed to, you know, like what I'd done previously is just, you know, I posted on Bandcamp and I'm like, it's going to do what it's going to do. And hopefully whenever I make the argument to you all that it is doing its work, that you find that credible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. I was just going to follow up. Is there a danger that this is doing twice as much work for, you know, half as much respect, or is there something about leveraging your performative, like the cachet? I know that like there's cachet that works that comes with performance, but a lot of times, you know, the university doesn't. It's like, oh, you know, we love that, you know, it's really great community engagement.
Yeah.
And it's like, how does that work with the tenure file? Like, show me the money. Don't make me work twice as hard for half as much.
Yeah, no, there was this thing when I was writing my dissertation, and then folks were like, yeah, but what about the prose component or whatever? And I'm like, well, I wrote the lyrics, and the lyrics say the things that I'm trying to say. And so if someone's asking me to write the other thing, then like you're asking me to write two dissertations. You're asking me to write the dissertation that I wrote and then write a dissertation about that dissertation. And this is the same thing. Now, when I was a graduate student, you know, like quiet as kept, I'm like, all right, well, you know, like I'll be prepared for whatever else comes. I guess it's not keeping it quiet if I'm saying it here. But here, when I was asked the question, you know, like when we're in this process, so I'm talking over what the deliverables are. And one of the questions is like, well, what about some prose to go with the album? And I'm like, well, yeah, we can do an introduction. That's fine. But if you're asking me to write, you know, like write a book about the album, then like, why wouldn't I just publish a book about the album and then publish the album? Now, I'm cool if we do a book about the album, let's do it. But that's a different project. You know, like you're not, like, again, you're not going to do two projects and then call it one. Because then the person who's having to labor through that is me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
well, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then folks are going to, I mean, I think that in this space, folks are going to focus on the text that they understand, and then use that as the primary text that they're referencing, rather than looking at what I said in the songs, or how the songs are constructed, or how the sequence of the songs make the argument that I'm trying to make. And that was, you know, that was one of the issues, or one of the things that I saw as a potential issue with Sleepwalking 2, was that I'm like, well, let me make this digestible. And it's 15 minutes and you know, it's 5 tracks, and it's as close to, you know, like 5-paragraph or 5-chapter, you know, monograph or whatever as I can get, and say, I'm introducing it, I'm giving you, you know, like the argument straight through, and then I'm concluding it.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know how successful that is for people who are thinking through the ways that books are laid out, like while they're listening to an album, or, you know, what I'm calling a mixtape essay, which is, you know, it's an album. It is, you know, it's a mixtape. It's doing that work, but like I'm knowing that there are multiple audiences for this work.
No, I'm just hearing you talk about that flow through and mapping that sort of book model onto the thing. Hip hop has such an excellent way, in the way that hip hop is already so citational. Every time you use those fragments from Decatur history, or samples, or found sounds, all these things are those embedded bits of wisdom. If we want to follow through, we can. Yeah. I was just going to say, so Sean has a poll up for us next, and then I wanted to get to kind of the big question. So maybe here's Sean's poll question for you all to use in the chat. Again, Lauren Kara says she couldn't pick 2. You got to pick 1. And yeah, country emo pop ain't on there.
We were limited to 10 options.
Yeah, limited to 10 options.
ODB said, I'm a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll, you know, just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
We have Sean Witzman in the chat suggested psychedelic rock as his genre. And
I think there's a Q&A, there's a question over in the Q&A too about peer review. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not trying to like muck up the.
No, go ahead. Feel free to answer while people are sending their results.
Yeah, so the question says, speaking of Griff's point just now, did knowing that it had to go through peer review change or limit how I approach the lyrics and music? Is it framed so that it can somehow pass that process and who counts as peers. And I think that Sarah kind of has a better answer to this, to part of this question. From my perspective, no, I wasn't thinking about a peer review when I wrote the album. And all of my considerations of peer review came after I got the reviewer reports back. I didn't have those folks living in my head, nor would I want them to live in my head, whoever they would be. Because, you know, like, I'm trying my best to not think a whole lot about what, you know, like, folks in these fields are. I mean, I'm thinking about their work, but I'm not thinking about what they think about my work, especially if that's going to change the way that I present what I do. But like, those folks who are doing, or who are speaking about, I mean, I remember having a conversation with Fred Moten about my dissertation. And I was thinking, if anybody understands what I'm trying to do, he would. And, you know, he kind of, like, very casually, after I told him that I had like these little cards that I would give to people and tell them to go to the QR code. And he's like, I'm surprised they let you do that. And so, I mean, imagine having that, like, rather than his actual, like, his words, you know, that he's written about, you know, like, you know, doing the kinds of things that we might do, you know, issuing the kind of challenges. Imagine having they ain't gonna let you do that in your head. Because then you're not gonna do it. Like, you're not going to, I mean, I just imagine that I would be discouraged by that. So I guess in the same way that I tell folks, you know, like, here's my bad advice. It's like, yeah, do the thing that you want to do, and then worry about, like, you know, who the peers are, or worry about what folks might say about it. And then also, I think I had the opportunity to be able to talk about how, if someone wanted me to write like this long piece of prose, or this other project, how that would undermine the project that I'm working on, and had folks who respected that process, my input on that process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was just thinking, like, Eshon Crowley, his work publishes the book and then does the sort of performative thing. And what you said about two different, if that's a different you know, if you're asking, you can't have me do two things that serves as one thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Fred Moten's work, whether it's poetry or performative prose, all of those models are so inspirational for sort of shaking. I mean, I know that the publishing industry, we can talk to Sarah and Lauren about this some other time, but, you know, the publishing industry it's a tricky business, like, right now. Like, we have all of these different options for hypertexts and links and the stuff that the Fulcrum system can do, but it's still put it on this book, put the bibliography in. And it's just, I guess, just an exciting way to, it's kind of an exciting moment for reimagining what we can do. I was just going to read this. Lauren dropped this quote in from Guy Ramsey. While it may be true that the leaderships and the rank and file of our professional music societies have remained committed to the ideals of cultural diversity, true diversity will mean a change in what counts as valuable knowledge in our professional discourses. New criticisms demand new attitudes.
Yeah.
I was just reading sort of that. Actually, also the sort of vulnerabilities of the Eshon Crowley's work and this album and this mixtape essay, I Used to Love to Dream, are both, I think, epitomize that sort of need for new models. So, thank you. All right, I wanted to give us some time to wrap up with a talk before we turn it over to the audience. To talk about, I know it's not this summer, and I don't mean to say that everything changed with George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's murder, but if something feels different, and I want to just ask you about that track 4, just in case. When you talk about talking back, actually, even in preparing for this interview, we said, should we have kind of a trigger warning page? And some of these conversations are uncomfortable, and sometimes we do need to be able to talk back and to be disrespectful and to be all of those things that hip hop enables us to do that sometimes scholarly discourses do not allow.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about Just In Case, about police brutality, and about its place in on this artifact that you've created for us.
Yeah. So, Just In Case I think that it was really tough, and this is, it's a piece that lived with me for a really long time because of the, what felt necessary when I lived in South Carolina, and then also the persistence of that. And so it's not like, this is one of those things that you might write and it'll never go away. And it seems, a bit fatalistic to say, it'll be unnecessary. Like you can say, I hope it's not necessary tomorrow. Or, when I wrote it, because, it was a young person who was killed down in Seneca, South Carolina. And, circumstances, like ultimately, I mean, the police killed him, and that's like, I think that's just like a statement of fact. And then living there again, being so far from home, and then having to navigate this, well, what do I tell my people about the actual danger that is right here? And, like having, my mom is like, well, since you can't be quiet, be careful, that kind of thing. And then, so I wrote this and read it at this rally, and, kind of tucked it away. And I think that every time reading it kind of made me shudder a bit, because this is not me like sort of entering into a hypothetical situation, like I mean this. And maybe there's more that I mean that I'm not saying there, because it's maybe even more difficult to be as honest as I want to be. And so where I'm asking people to ask questions, maybe, like my demand or my command to those people, what I'm imploring them is to do something more than just ask. But, what I have is that piece. And I felt, for a lot of different reasons, different about being able to commit it to a recording now than I did whenever I was living there. And it's not because the danger is gone, like it's not because of what was in South Carolina is not in Charlottesville, because we all know, like what's in Charlottesville. And we all know like what's on campuses all across the country. And we all see and hear about what's going on every day. So, it had to be, it had to be something else. And I don't really know what that is, but I will, I will share the piece, I suppose.
If you would, yeah, we talked about maybe doing one a cappella, and this is the one that came to my mind.
Yeah. So, if I die in police custody, please ask questions, because though I sometimes speak out of turn and ask why more often than some folks care to entertain, I don't see me leaving an exchange with an officer so depressed and disconcerted that it would take me away from you. If you're told I resisted, please ask for evidence, because you and I know they're armed with everything from pepper spray to tasers, and taking that into consideration, anything that would make me move suddenly or do anything to escalate their use of force to my own final destination in that moment is less likely than what you'll find to be true. If they tell you how bad I was before then, please remain vigilant, because none of my past behavior should justify me leaving an interaction with law enforcement with the ultimate penalty enacted without the due process afforded others in courts of law. In fact, if law enforcement forces those who laws enforced impact, whose backs and torsos act as source code, hacked, and more so lack the morals tacked to moral acts, then go and ask if my blasting or maiming was more a result of semi-factual blaming than poor tactical training, and whoever's tasked with staffing and claiming credit for a job well done should be person number one to whom this query is posed. What I'm asking is for you to ask and keep asking if those sworn to protect and serve say to you that in order to properly execute their duties, it was necessary to execute me. And the truth is, you know, it doesn't match up with the truth you know to be. It's likely because the truth that's in between those two is too inconvenient for those who have the power to speak it. And the way to honor me isn't to turn the other cheek. It's to ask again and again, again and again, why? And I'm telling you now to ask these questions then, because it seems to be happening far too frequently, and the trend is forcing me to err on the side of suspicion. And my only true defense against what may be inevitable, unconscionable as it should be to us all, is to hold whoever is at fault responsible, even if who's responsible is considered the law.
Thank you, AD.
Thanks.
And let me just say that keep asking questions relates, I mean, I want to say, relates directly back to that point about the formats, the knowledge structures, whether it's on the street or in the ivory tower, keep asking the tough questions. And it does take some courage. So thank you for reminding us of that. I'm going to turn it over now. Teresa and Sean may have some questions for us.
Yeah. Yes, please feel free to submit questions in the chat.
Yeah, put them in the chat box.
Yeah, and we also have from our Facebook live stream, I have a question from Leslie Scott Jones. Would you equate a mixtape essay to Shang's choreo poem?
I would, yeah, I think that I would say that there's probably, like, there's similar, maybe similar work going on. Like, I mean, when I say mixtape essay, I think it's really just to signal its existence in both of those places more than I'm saying that what it is, that the product is a different thing. I know that, you know, because it's, you know, it's weird to say that, you know, that rappers who are writing other albums aren't aiming to do certain kinds of work that I don't know that they aren't trying to do. I don't know what any rapper is aiming to do whenever they write. You know, like other rappers might be, you know, trying to like structure their album. I mean, I did a mixtape with a guy back in Decatur that was supposed to, you know, it was supposed to be a school day. It was supposed to be like, you know, 8 periods of class. I think it was called Class Notes, you know, and we just like, we structured it like a school day. I mean, I wasn't working at any, well, I guess I was working at a university then, but I wasn't trying to get tenure at it. I was aiming to do whenever they write, you know, like other rappers. Oh, that's weird. But
that was me.
No, it's all good. So yeah, I think that that's just a way, like in name, to like to signal that I want this to do the work that it's doing outside of the academy and the work inside the academy, because, you know, as the joke goes, you know, like rappers will do anything to get you to listen to their mixtape. You know, I guess like maybe they'll also call it a mixtape essay.
Thank you. Any other questions from the chat? If not, we'll be.
If I forgot any earlier.
Yeah. If not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we're good with questions, we'll give everyone another minute. But then if not, we'll direct you guys on where you can listen to this work and also talk a little bit about.
Maybe I can, could I just, proceeding, sure. What did you think? We talked a little bit about, you know, alternative formats, and when I checked out the Fulcrum, you know, at first I listened to it just not MP3 tracks on my computer in preparing for this, but then when I saw the how the Fulcrum thing works, well, first of all, what was your first impression of seeing that digital object? And is that the model, like going forward? We were talking about Beyonce's visual albums or
Yeah.
all sorts of different formats. But what was your take when you saw the thing finished?
Yeah, no, I really like the way it looks. And I appreciate having all of the artifacts in that one place. And so what you'll see in Fulcrum, I mean, you know, like the one limitation, and you'll see like the resources have a link out to the Bandcamp list so that you can actually hear the album straight through. Because if you've listened to the album, you know that that's an important aspect to be able to listen to it from beginning to end.
Yeah.
That the sequencing is kind of important of the tracks. And so I think that's the one limitation, is that the playlist doesn't go all the way through. You have to go from one track and then like you're turning the page and going to the next track rather than being able to like kind of playlist it. But though I love the presentation of it, and I think that the apprehension that I had beforehand, and I think I told Sarah this, I was like, yeah, I think like if I'm being honest, and I try to be, it's like, yeah, this is gonna be ugly. And you know, like we're just gonna have to like suffer through what it's gonna look like. And I clicked in it when they gave me the preview. I'm like, oh, this is dope. This is, I mean, I like the way this looks, and the experience is much. It's a different experience than what I expected to have engaging with the work within the platform, and I mean that like in the most positive way. And so yeah, I like it. And so I guess if I'm talking about ways that it can be improved, that one thing that I'm talking about is probably the main one right now. The other things are, I think, nice. And so I'm hoping that people are able to interact with both the playlist as it exists in those other platforms, and be able to go there and get the PDFs in the film, and follow along while the songs are playing with the with the annotations or with the captions.
Yeah, that was incredibly rich. That was a rich experience, and exactly the same thing. It doesn't feel like too Frankenstein. It feels natural. It feels like a thing.
Yeah.
It's quite successful.
So shout out to the people who designed that in Fulcrum, because that's beyond my my design capability.
Yeah, check it out, everybody. Make sure to go check it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for ending on that note. And I know Sarah's the editor's statement about taking on this project included that Fulcrum really allowed us to publish this project. So thank you. Griff and AD, are you guys good to wrap up, and we'll do a little info about your works and where to find them?
Here one more time for AD Carson, AD the Great. Woo!
Also want to shout out my grandparents and my families, my family, but families. Yeah, that's just a thing that I want to make sure that I say.
Great. Sean, you want to take it away and wrap us up?
Absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. And thanks so much to AD and Griff, and to everyone who attended this amazing talk. This is normally the point in the presentation where I would show you where to purchase these fine books, but in the case of AD's, it is free. So we will distribute that link again. And and then remind you as well that Griff's book is coming out next year, Critical Excess. And we also have a book on our backlist that may be of interest to some of you by Professor Howard Ramsey, Black Arts Enterprise and the Production of African American Poetry. And where you can find these, I Used to Love to Dream is available on Fulcrum, and as well as on a Bandcamp playlist. And I hear there is a physical LP forthcoming. And you can pre-order Critical Access on the University of Michigan Press website. And remind you to check out the entire UMP ebook collection on Fulcrum through the end of August.
Yeah, and I think I want to say about the donations, that like the donations, that anything that comes through Bandcamp and all of the proceeds from the physical LP are going to be donated to young musicians back in Decatur. And so I just like, that's where all of that, like if you go to Bandcamp, you can enter 000 and get the project free. But if you do put anything in those boxes, all of that will be going to young folks in Decatur.
Yes, thank you. All right. So thank you all again for attending. Thanks so much to AD and Griff and to Teresa for hosting.
Appreciate y'all. Peace.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, all. Thank you again, Edie.
Thank you, Griff.